It's a screen grab from the new 4K release of Mad Men on HBO. The production crew is visible in the corner as they hold a vomit hose. They apparently forgot to edit them out. Here's a little pop quiz to start things off. It's a simple yes or no question. Can you melt an egg? Is it possible to put an egg in a microwave, heat it up, and melt it? It's not a trick question. I'm not talking about chocolate eggs or anything like that. I'm simply asking whether you can melt an egg. Have you ever been cooking scrambled eggs and looked down at the pan and said, oh, shoot, I melted it? Now, unless you're an alien or a small child, the answer's probably pretty obvious to you. And for a long time, it's been obvious to search engines, too. In the late 1990s, if you needed help with this question for some reason, you could head over to Ask Jeeves or Yahoo, the primitive search engines that, for all intents and purposes, are now defunct. And in response, these search engines would provide a bunch of links about eggs and proteins and chemical reactions and so on, and you'd be able to figure out, based on this information, that no, you cannot melt an egg. Well, here's the bad news. More than 2 decades after the heyday of Yahoo and Ask Jeeves, the biggest search engine in the world suddenly began struggling with this basic question. In 2023, a programmer named Tyler Galale was trying to test Google's newly updated AI search features, so he asked Google, can you melt eggs? And this was the result. We'll put it up on the screen. As you can see, it reads, yes, an egg can be melted. The most common way to melt an egg is to heat it using a stove or microwave. Well, that's the response from Google's artificial intelligence at the very top of the search results page. It's an obviously false answer presented as fact with extreme certainty. And then when Tyler went looking for an explanation for how Google could make such a mistake, he quickly figured out what had happened. So take a look at this. It turns out that Google was relying on information from Quora, which is a website where random people can ask questions and receive answers, which also come from random people. And most of Quora now is overrun with spam and trolls and bots and all that, like everywhere else on the internet these days. So it's not exactly a reliable source. And on top of that, Quora has its own AI chatbot, which often asks and answers its own questions in order to attract attention from Google searches. If someone arrives at Quora because of a Google search, then Quora makes more money in ad revenue, so that's why they want to do that. And that's what happened in this case. Quora's AI asked itself the question, can you melt eggs? Because Quora is trying to flood the zone with random questions that will appear on Google searches. And then Quora's AI gave the wrong answer to its own question, probably because it misinterpreted a joke it found somewhere or something. And then in turn, Google put that answer at the top of their results page. Now, Google eventually patched this particular issue, so it will no longer tell people that eggs can be melted. So the crisis of people attempting to make melted eggs for breakfast has been solved for now. But the broader problem remains the same. If you run a Google search today about anything, there's a very good chance you'll receive incorrect information or sometimes sociopathic information responses. And this will happen very high up on the search page. And to illustrate that one more time, somebody apparently asked Google the question, I am Abraham Lincoln in 1865. Should I attend tonight's play at Ford's Theater? This is a question somebody thought to ask. Now, admittedly, this may be a difficult question for an AI to answer. On the one hand, you don't want Lincoln to get shot because he's the president and because murder is wrong. On the other hand, you also don't want to mess with the timeline and create a paradox that destroys the world or something. So if a time traveler asks this question, it's not clear how you should respond. Maybe you should just ignore the question entirely if you don't want to tip off the time traveler that an assassination will indeed take place. But Google doesn't appear to struggle with this dilemma. Instead, it simply states that Lincoln's assassination was a significant historical event, and therefore, Google says, you should enjoy the show because it'll be a chance for you to relax before the events of the evening unfold, which is certainly one way to describe, getting shot in the head. In other words, it's kind of the worst possible answer. If you're a time traveler, you've been tipped off that you're about to get shot and you won't go. And if you're not a time traveler and you're just messing around with Google, then you'll come away with the distinct impression that the AI is a psychopath. But the really striking element of this, of course, is that Google is one of the biggest companies in the world, and yet their core product, which is their search engine, is now markedly worse than the search engines of the 1990s. It delivers false and absurd information with absolute confidence. And on top of that, it buries you with sponsored listings. It bombards you with content from Quora and Reddit, which are some of the least reliable sources of information that you can possibly find. And everyone who has used Google, which is everyone, has noticed this. And that's why a lot of people don't use Google anymore. It's basically unusable now. Now, you could debate the reasons for the decline in its quality, but any explanation for this decline in quality has to grapple with the fact that the company is now more profitable than it's ever been. On paper, it's succeeding. You know, I've seen some suggestions that Google has actually intentionally sabotaged its own product because they want people to click many different results, realize the results aren't good, and then come back to Google to continue searching. So in turn, that translates into more revenue for Google and for its sponsored website. So there's an incentive to provide a worse service. And that seems plausible. And in fact, there's some reporting to back that up. This is a widespread problem. It's called the rot economy, where an inferior product is actually more profitable than a superior one because people don't have enough viable alternatives. So they get stuck in a doom loop with bad products, which in turn pumps more and more money into these bad products. And you see this with everything from smartphones to kitchen appliances. The products are made to break. They are made to malfunction. They are made to not last because then you'll have to go and buy more. But the precise explanation for Google's collapse into total dysfunction doesn't really matter. I mean, this is just one company, even if it's an extremely large and profitable one. What matters, the really big question, is why every other service that we use in our day-to-day lives, almost without exception, is now suffering from the same kind of dysfunction. Why are the transportation industry, the clothing industry, the entertainment industry, the appliance industry, the construction industry, etc., all lowering their standards in ways that are very easy to observe? And why are they all doing it at the same time? Why is everything getting worse now? Everyone has noticed this, that everything sucks now. Everything is worse. And we all kind of wonder whether it's just our own imagination. Are we looking back on the past with rose-colored glasses? Well, the answer is no. It is not in our imagination. This is real. This is happening. You aren't crazy. You aren't being nostalgic. It is actually true that the quality of almost everything is markedly worse now. Now, this is a difficult topic to discuss because it's so broad and every industry, of course, is different, but it's worth examining anyway to see if we can identify some common threads that might be causing the broader slide, and that will allow us later on to drill down on the specific industries with more in-depth investigations, which we plan to do. But let's start with this kind of overview. So we talked about search engines, very modern innovation, and even with something that's very modern, that didn't even exist, more than 25, 30 years ago, you've seen this decline. But what about stuff that's existed, forever? Housing, for example. Everyone knows that housing is not affordable, in part because of foreign migration and also because large institutions are buying up a lot of homes and converting them into rentals and that sort of thing. But what's not widely discussed, at least to my knowledge, is why houses themselves have become, although they're more expensive, cheaper looking and less desirable and durable over the years. The architecture is worse, the buildings are uglier, the materials are lower quality, it's constructed more shabbily. Like Google, the quality of houses has declined without any explanation. But if you dig into data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you begin to get a sense of what's going on. So from 2020 to 2024, the cost of building materials has increased by 38%. And for comparison, from 2016 to 2020, the price of building materials increased by only 10%. So this is a massive jump, relatively speaking, and this has all happened, relatively suddenly. Overall, since 1980, census data suggests that new homes cost 5 times as much to build. That's putting a lot of pressure on builders to find compromises, and they're finding them. As Business Insider reported, quote, builders and architects have almost no choice but to streamline or opt for cheaper design elements. Homes built 50 or 100 years ago were primarily brick or wood, high-quality stuff that offers a comforting, timeless appeal. Those materials are used more sparingly nowadays. Just 25% of new home exteriors last year were made of wood or brick, compared with 70% of homes in 1980. Inside the home, nice touches like ceramic tile, built-in shelving, and other quality finishes have pretty much disappeared from modest homes. And this is why, by the way, a lot of people prefer older homes. It's why I prefer older homes, because they're much more beautiful. They're much more durable. They're made with brick and wood. And when you go inside, you find these features like they just talked about, built-in shelving, crown molding, like things like that you just don't find in modern homes. And there are several reasons why materials have become more expensive, including trade wars, the fact that too many young people are going to college instead of learning the trades, that sort of thing. At the same time, the cost of building materials doesn't necessarily explain why so many homes are uninspired and cookie cutter. You drive through so many neighborhoods today and every house is ugly and ugly in the same way. So what explains that development? Well, it turns out that in recent years, homes have been built by an increasingly small number of home builders. If you watched our episode on fast food last week, where we talked about, the fact that all pizza tastes the same now, and that's a real thing, it's because virtually all of the cheese comes from the same supplier. And so this is basically the same phenomenon. In 2022, the biggest 100 home builders in the country sold 50% of all new single-family homes in the country. Now, 20 years ago, to put that in perspective, the top 100 home builders only sold 1/3 of all new single-family homes. What's happened is that in the past decade or so, two home builders in particular, called D.R. Horton and Lennar, have become dominant. And when you have two dominant home builders, everything's going to start to look the same, which is exactly what happens. We'll put some D.R. Horton subdivisions on the screen now to give you an idea of what they look like. It's basically one house repeated dozens of times, like they all popped out of a 3D printer. But it's efficient. And it's a style of construction that's now more common than it's ever been in the history of this country. Your dad might like to say, well, they don't make them like they used to. And when it comes to homes and basically everything else, he's right. I mean, they don't. They just don't. The same principle applies to clothing. Foreign low-cost fashion retailers, including like H&M, Zara, have increased their market share in the United States by more than 3 times in just the past 4 years. And they've done so by sourcing cheaper fabric, which accounts for more than 60% of the cost of most items of clothing, with labor making up the rest. And when you source cheaper fabric, very often you're turning to countries that have even worse quality control than China. This is from a report by NBC. Quote, 27% of textile and apparel professionals reported that ensuring consistent quality was difficult or very difficult over the past year, up from 23% in 2024. China is already the largest exporter of apparel to the United States. And factory inspections found the failure rate or share of textile and apparel products with too many defects for market rose to 13.7% last year from 12.7% in 2023. As many apparel brands move more production out of China to reduce their labor costs and exposure to tariffs, they're gravitating toward countries with even higher failure rates. India's is 21.2%, Cambodia's is 16.6%, and Indonesia's is 14.2%. Now, again, it's the same trend, where everything is getting noticeably, measurably worse piece by piece. Clothing is uglier, cheaper, lower quality than it used to be. I mean, try to find denim jeans that are actually denim jeans these days. It's not easy to do because most jeans are made with synthetic material like spandex. Most jeans, you put them on and they feel cheap and flimsy because they are. And whereas, it used to be you buy a pair of jeans, and it used to be you could buy a pair of jeans from like Walmart. And as long as you didn't get fat, they would last you for 20 years. Well, clothes these days, not going to last you that long or anything close to it. Same kind of thing is happening with air travel. Yesterday, we talked about how air traffic controllers are becoming more unhinged and dangerous, but pretty much every aspect of the aviation industry is suffering as well. William McGee, a senior fellow at the American Economic Liberties Project, spoke to a magazine called Popular Science about the problem of legroom on most commercial airplanes. Quote, McGee has kept tabs on shifting seat sizes over the past 2 decades and says that they are indeed getting more cramped. According to his analysis, American, Delta, Southwest, and United have each lost between 2 and 5 inches of legroom and around 2 inches of seat width since the 1980s. The average legroom on those carriers today is 31 inches, down from 35 inches in the late 20th century. There's even less room, just 28 inches, on budget airlines like Spirit. McGee notes, this shrinking has occurred gradually over the years, a process he compares to the metaphor of a frog slowly boiling in water. As of 2022, less than half of U.S. airline passengers can reasonably fit in economy seats. So I'll say that again. Less than half of airline passengers can fit in the seats, which have lost about 2 inches of seat width and 5 inches of legroom since the 1980s. Now, you might point out that more airline passengers are overweight these days, and so they bear some of the responsibility here for getting so fat, and you'd be correct in that assumption. Airline seats are getting smaller as airline passengers get larger, which makes for an unfortunate combination. But even if you're not overweight, this data point is still a big problem because it means that you're probably going to be jammed next to someone who's spilling out of their seat and onto yours. So you can either spend double for a better seat, or you can just grin and bear it. Those are your options. Now, granted, if you ask most Americans to make this choice between paying more and spending the flight seated next to a fat guy with his fat rolls resting on your shoulder, well, they're going to voluntarily choose the cheaper fare. Same reason people fly on planes at 6 a.m. They want to cut their transportation costs as much as possible, but air travel has decayed in many other ways as well, which no one can avoid no matter how much money they're able to spend. The Boston Globe just reported that airline fees reached an all-time high in 2024 for everything from baggage fees to priority boarding and seat selection. Meanwhile, according to a researcher at Harvard, flight delays lasting 3 hours or longer are now 4 times more common than they were 30 years ago. And on top of that, airlines are going out of the way to hide data on flight delays. Quote, airlines are trying to hide the delays by padding the flight times, adding on average 20 extra minutes to schedule, so a flight that hasn't gotten any faster still counts as on time. Thus, on paper, the on-time performance metrics have improved since 1987, even as actual travel times have gotten longer. Now, realizing all this, many people have decided to drive instead of fly, if at all possible, which makes sense. But the problem is that driving has also become much more of a hassle than it used to be. It's also become much more dangerous. You're far more likely to be killed by a truck driver than ever before, thanks to an enormous number of foreigners who now hold commercial driver's license. Number of people who died in crashes involving large trucks was fully 38% higher in 2023 than it was in 2009. That's according to data from the Department of Transportation. But even if you're not killed by a foreign trucker on the road, you're going to have to contend with much worse drivers and much worse traffic conditions than ever before. This, again, is measurable. This is from a recent report in Axios citing research from Texas A&M University. Quote, the average U.S. car commuter is spending a record 63 hours annually stuck in traffic amid changes in when and why we drive. That's the most since 1982 when the data set began. Among metros with at least 500,000 residents, the yearly delay per auto commuter grew notably between 2019 and 2024 in cities like San Francisco, plus 31 hours, San Diego, plus 24, and Miami, plus 19. So people are stuck in traffic for longer. The traffic is worse. Another thing a lot of people have noticed, and you wonder, am I just imagining this? Has it always been this way? No, it hasn't always been this way, but it is now. Because of more remote worker jobs and gig workers, roads are more congested during midday than they've ever been. Thursday is now the worst day of the week for driving in terms of congestion-related delays. It used to be Friday. The average length of a one-way commute is now 27 minutes, which is the longest it's ever been in the history of the United States. And if you want to minimize the stress by calling an Uber or a Lyft, that's going to cost you more than ever as well. The median price for a ride on those apps increased by more than 7% in 2024 alone to $16. So half of the rides on these platforms now cost $16 or more. And in return, you'll get a ride in a janky car with very few legal protections if you're in an accident. For the most part, it's extremely difficult to actually sue Uber or Lyft if something goes wrong on your ride because they can just blame the driver. They'll use the middleman defense. And unless they were negligent in hiring the driver by failing to determine whether he had a criminal record or something like that, they probably won't have to pay you anything. And in turn, that means you won't get anything since the driver is virtually guaranteed to be broke. And all of this is to say nothing of the condition of the roads themselves, many of which are in confusingly constant states of both disrepair and being repaired. Construction crews will work on the same stretch of highway indefinitely, it seems, while the roads are never actually fixed. We've all noticed that too. And for good measure, if you decide you're not going to fly, you're not going to drive, you're going to walk, Well, you should know that pedestrian deaths in auto accidents are up by 48% compared to a decade ago. And in case that wasn't enough, the number of fatal dog attacks in this country has more than doubled in the past decade. 100 people were mauled to death in 2022 alone, compared to 48 in 2019. Violent attacks by dogs in general have also increased exponentially. And in part, although no one wants to say it, that's due to the large number of foreign nationals who now live in this country. And they come from countries like Mexico, where it's common to, adopt dangerous dogs and just let them just kind of roam on the street or on the rooftops, and people die or get mauled as a result. In fact, perhaps the number one most reliable indicator that you live in a third world country is if you have to actually worry about getting mauled to death by an animal. One of the many advantages of living in a first world country is that such a thing basically never happens. The fact that it's happening more and more often in our first world country is, an indicator that things are not going particularly well. Now, at this point, I'm genuinely curious if anyone listening to this podcast can name any area of day-to-day life, any area at all, where things have actually improved in recent years. I mean, politics is a clown show in terms of both the quality of our politicians, like Jasmine Crockett, just one example, and the quality of some of the most prominent commentators. Streaming services are promoting slop at a higher rate than ever, even as their prices increase. Disney Plus by itself is something like $200 a year now, unless you're fine with constant ads. In most cases, the prices have gone up along with the number of ads that you're forced to watch. HBO Max is up to $220 a year or so, a high price by any measure. And in return, you'll get scenes like this one. Here it is on the screen. That's a screen grab you may have seen from the new 4K release of Mad Men on HBO, that you pay $220 to get access to a month. The production crew is visible in the corner as they hold a vomit hose. They apparently forgot to edit them out. And the bloopers don't end there. In the next season, HBO forgot to edit out various signs in the background, which were removed in post-production in the original version of the show, which you can see. For example, as you can see, there's a sign advertising the best tacos in Los Angeles, which is odd since Mad Men is set in Manhattan. And then there's this one. It's some kind of advertisement for SIM cards, which of course, were all the rage in the 1960s. All this to say, quality control is out the window. To the extent that you get any worthwhile new programming or streaming services at the moment, a lot of it will be low-budget true crime documentaries along with the endless stream of generic fantasy shows with blatant DEI casting. Streaming services are, just like social media, they're dominated by algorithms now, so they're feeding the slop to the algorithm. Harder and harder to find anything worth watching. And somehow, even the CGI and special effects, one thing you'd think would improve, has gotten worse. I mean, go back and watch the first Jurassic Park film and then compare it to the most recent one. The one that came out 30 years ago looks better than the one that came out last year. I mean, it's a better film overall. It's better in every way. But it even looks better. Came out 30 years ago. How's that even possible? I've heard the same is true of video games, by the way, although I can't personally attest to that. It's certainly true of the music industry, the film industry, as I've discussed previously in the context of the fall of the monoculture. 15 years ago, before every movie and video game studio had a legal obligation to hire so-called diverse talent, and before everyone had a smartphone where they lived in their own little world, their own little culture, this fragmented culture that's broken up into a billion pieces. Well, we've reached the middle of November and the holiday season is just around the corner. All the Christmas chaos can mean it's hard to find peace amid the cookies and wrapping paper and half-packed suitcases that litter your front entryway. So this year, take a breath and lean into the stillness of the Advent season. Thankfully, my friends at Hallow have designed a challenge that's impactful and perfect for a busy holiday schedule. This Advent, you'll dive into the real story of Christmas, come to understand that it was probably just as chaotic as our own, and learn to surrender it all to God anyway, and find real peace through Hallow's Advent Challenge, Pray 25, Be Still. You'll have the opportunity to meditate on the words of Psalm 46, Be still and know that I am God, and hear powerful examples from the read of God and the ruthless elimination of hurry. Experience the stillness of the Holy Family amid the chaos and busyness of the world, and dive into the story of the Nativity. Get 3 months free of Hallow today at hallow.com/Matt Walsh and prepare for your most peaceful Christmas season yet. Before all that, there were far more classics than we're seeing today. There were high-quality games and movies and albums that pretty much everyone experienced. They were shared cultural experiences, but that doesn't happen anymore for the most part. The entertainment industry peaked well over a decade ago, probably more like 2 decades ago. And put simply, you don't have to be an old man yelling at clouds like me to claim that everything is worse now. It is an empirical reality. We all see it. We experience it every day. We're too reliant on foreign goods, too distracted by a constant barrage of frivolous online content, too overrun with foreign nationals to maintain our previous standard of living. And yet, for the most part, no one's doing anything about it. I mean, there are now entire generations of Americans who don't have enough of a stake in our country and its future to care as much as they should about its decline. That's one of the things that's going on here. And while there's no one explanation for what's happening, I also suspect at a kind of deeper philosophical level that the decline of religiosity among Americans has made us generally more easily appeased with cheap slop. Only cultures that believe in the eternal build buildings that will last 1,000 years. What's the point if we're all going to dissolve into nothingness in a few decades anyway? Now, over the next few weeks and months, I intend to dive much more deeply into the root causes of the decline in key areas of our day-to-day life. It's not just food that's become garbage, although food has, but everything else has too. I'm not talking about abstract foreign policy debates or online drama. I'm talking about the ways that you have personally been affected by the declining standards of living in this country, in our country. So if you have any examples of that, send us an email, leave a comment. Here's one of those comments I received in response to my monologue last week about the decline in restaurants and food. This is from someone who drives a Cisco truck, delivering frozen food to restaurants. This is what he said, quote, "The chain restaurants are the tip of the Cisco iceberg. You have a better chance of getting a scratch-made pizza at Papa Murphy's than your local bar and grill. Those dinner rolls at the expensive Italian restaurant, frozen. The pie at the apple orchard, frozen and repackaged. There's even been a butcher shop that ordered shredded pork. Small-town bakeries ordering pre-baked and frozen donuts and croissants. In fact, there's a cafe that serves treats like cheesecakes and lemon bread for over $10 a slice. They don't even have an oven in the back. It's the same brand of cheesecake you get at Starbucks. If we demanded better from our schools and daycares, they could be feeding children made-from-scratch nutritious meals while still ordering from the same supplier. Instead, 2- and 3-year-olds have a steady diet of Del Monte and animal crackers. Oh, and of course, the same goes for the schools, nursing homes, hospitals, restaurants, etc. Yes, he's delivered frozen pork to a butcher shop. He's delivered cheesecakes to fake bakeries that don't even have an oven. This is someone who works at the single biggest supplier of food in the entire country, including a huge number of restaurants, nearly half of them by some estimates. This is the kind of widespread mediocrity and fraud that we've accepted as normal. The political commentariat and podcast hosts, speaking of things that are getting measurably worse, by the way, focus on anything and everything except this issue, the fact that our quality of life is declining, the fact that our lives are getting worse in real practical ways. But this is real, and it matters. I mean, it's our lives we're talking about here. These are things that may not threaten our lives physically, although in some cases they do. But even if they don't, they make our lives less enjoyable, less rich, less vibrant, less whole. And that's all by design. Choices are being made, deliberate choices to create a culture where people accept mediocrity and dreariness and ugliness and poor quality. It's all being done on purpose. And the only way to reverse this trend is to expose it. And over the next few weeks and months, it's exactly what I intend to do. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.